The Galactic Engineering Council meeting room fell silent as Admiral Zexthor of the Crystalline Collective slammed his four-jointed appendage against the polished obsidian table. His translucent form shimmered with frustration, casting rainbow patterns across the assembled delegates from 12 different species. "This is the third human structure that has collapsed this cycle," he declared, his voice resonating through multiple harmonic frequencies. "Their space elevator on Kepler 442b simply crumbled. No external forces, no hostile action, no natural disaster. It just fell apart after only 50 standard years of operation." Director Vashta of the Eternal Builders nodded gravely, her metallic exoskeleton clicking as she accessed the holographic display. The images that materialized above the table showed the aftermath of the collapse: twisted metal and shattered composite materials scattered across thousands of kilometers of the planet's surface. "This follows the pattern we've observed with their bridge on Proxima Station and their atmosphere processor on New Geneva," she added, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Each structure was built according to their specifications, using their chosen materials and designs. Our analysis shows no fundamental flaws in the engineering principles, yet they consistently fail decades before their calculated operational lifetime." Commander Teach-YSS of the Hive Mind Collective buzzed thoughtfully, his insectoid features twitching as thousands of minds process the information simultaneously. "Perhaps humans are simply inferior engineers. Their species has only achieved interstellar travel within the last 2 centuries. We have been building structures that last millennia for over 10,000 years." "That's what we initially believed," interrupted Dr. Kethala of the Academic Synthesis, her tentacles dancing across multiple data interfaces. "However, recent discoveries have forced us to reconsider this assumption. While investigating the ruins of their failed structures, our teams have made disturbing findings." The room's attention focused entirely on the elderly researcher as she manipulated the holographic display. New images appeared, microscopic views of metal fatigue, stress fractures, and molecular decay that seemed to follow impossible patterns. "The deterioration in human structures doesn't follow normal entropic processes," she explained, highlighting specific areas with precise tentacle movements. "The rate of decay suggests that their buildings and installations are aging far faster than they should, as if time itself moves differently around human construction projects." Admiral Zexthor's form flickered with skepticism. "You're suggesting temporal anomalies? That's impossible. Time flows uniformly throughout the galaxy." "Under normal circumstances, yes," Dr. Kethala agreed. "But humans aren't normal circumstances. Consider their history. They've survived 3 separate extinction events on their homeworld, rebuilt their civilization from scattered tribes multiple times, and somehow achieved faster-than-light travel despite having access to spaceflight for less than 300 years. They accomplish in decades what takes most species centuries or millennia." Director Vashta's exoskeleton hummed as she processed this information. "Are you implying that humans somehow manipulate temporal flow?" "Not consciously," the researcher replied. "But our observations suggest that human presence itself creates subtle distortions in local space-time. Their structures don't fail because of poor engineering. They fail because they exist in accelerated temporal fields." The implications of this statement rippled through the assembled delegates. Species that had mastered the fundamental forces of physics, bent matter to their will, and built structures spanning star systems found themselves confronted with a mystery that challenged their understanding of reality itself. Commander Teach-YSS's collective mind buzzed with increased intensity. This would explain their rapid technological advancement. If time moves faster around human activities, they would experience more development cycles within standard galactic timeframes. "It's more complex than that," Dr. Kethala continued, displaying new data streams. "Our monitoring stations have detected similar temporal distortions around human colonies, research facilities, and even their ships during extended voyages. The effect seems to be tied to human consciousness itself." The more humans present in an area, the stronger the temporal acceleration. Admiral Zex Thor rose from his seat, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting into spectacular patterns. If this is accurate, it represents a fundamental threat to galactic stability. Temporal manipulation technology has been banned for good reason. The potential for paradoxes and causality violations could unravel the fabric of space-time itself. But they're not using technology, Director Vashta pointed out. This appears to be an inherent biological trait. How do we regulate something that's built into their genetic structure? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. The Galactic Engineering Council had dealt with thousands of species across millions of years, each bringing unique challenges and solutions to the cosmic community. Some species were too aggressive and required careful monitoring. Others possessed dangerous psychic abilities that needed regulation. A few had been quarantined due to viral or bacterial contamination risks. But none had ever presented a challenge quite like humanity. Dr. Kethala accessed another set of data files, her tentacles moving with practiced efficiency. There's more. We've been studying human historical records, and the pattern extends far beyond their recent spacefaring activities. Archaeological evidence suggests that human structures have always aged rapidly compared to those built by other species on their homeworld. She displayed images of ancient human architecture, pyramids, temples, bridges, and monuments that showed signs of advanced decay despite being constructed with materials that should have lasted indefinitely. The Great Wall of their home planet, for instance, required constant reconstruction and maintenance. Their historical records describe it as a perpetual building project that consumed enormous resources across multiple centuries. At first, we attributed this to primitive construction techniques and inferior materials. But now you believe it was temporal acceleration, Commander THYSS stated, his collective mind already processing the implications. Exactly. The wall wasn't falling apart because it was poorly built. It was aging decades for every standard year that passed. The humans compensated by developing rapid construction techniques and learning to work with materials that could be quickly replaced when they inevitably deteriorated. Admiral Zex Thor began pacing, his movements creating shifting light patterns throughout the chamber. This presents unprecedented challenges for galactic engineering projects. How can we collaborate with humans on infrastructure development when their very presence undermines structural integrity? Perhaps we shouldn't, suggested Director Vashta grimly. If human involvement in construction projects creates insurmountable temporal complications, we may need to restrict their participation in galactic engineering initiatives. That would be both impractical and unjust, Dr. Kethala objected. Humanity has already been integrated into galactic society. They have colonies on 47 worlds, trade agreements with 63 species, and research partnerships throughout the galaxy. Complete isolation is no longer feasible. Commander THYSS's buzzing intensified. More importantly, their rapid development capabilities have proven invaluable in emergency situations. When the Rigel system faced catastrophic stellar collapse, human engineering teams developed and implemented evacuation solutions in months rather than the years it would have taken any other species. Because they were operating in accelerated time, Admiral Zex Thor realized. They weren't just working faster, they were literally experiencing more time than the rest of us during the crisis. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already unprecedented situation. The very trait that made human structures unstable also made them invaluable in time-critical scenarios. Dr. Kethala manipulated the display again, showing comparative timelines of various galactic engineering projects. Notice the pattern in emergency response scenarios. When humans are involved, project completion times drop by an average of 73%. But when humans are involved in long-term infrastructure projects, failure rates increase by 800% compared to galactic averages. So they're excellent for rapid deployment and crisis response, but terrible for permanent installations, Director Vashta summarized. This suggests a potential solution. We could develop protocols that leverage human temporal acceleration for emergency situations while excluding them from projects requiring long-term stability. That still doesn't address the fundamental question, Admiral Zex Thor pointed out. How do we manage a species whose very existence distorts the flow of time? What happens when human populations grow large enough that their temporal effects begin impacting entire star systems? Commander HFY's collective mind processed thousands of scenarios simultaneously. Current human population growth rates suggest they'll reach critical mass on several worlds within the next 2 centuries. If the temporal distortion effect scales with population density, we could see significant time differential zones developing around human colonies, which could create isolated pockets of accelerated development, Dr. Kethala added. Imagine human colonies advancing centuries while the rest of the galaxy experiences only decades. The technological and cultural gaps would become insurmountable. The implications were staggering. Galactic civilization had been built on the foundation of synchronized development and shared technological advancement. The discovery of temporal distortion around human activities threatened to undermine the basic assumptions that governed interspecies cooperation. Admiral Zex Thor stopped pacing and faced the assembled delegates. We need more data before we can formulate policy recommendations. Dr. Kethala, I want comprehensive temporal monitoring stations deployed around every major human settlement and construction project. We need to understand the full extent and nature of these distortions. Already in progress, she replied, though we've encountered some interesting complications. Human researchers have begun noticing our monitoring equipment and asking questions about temporal mechanics. They appear to be on the verge of discovering their own temporal effects. How close are they to understanding what's happening? Director Vashta asked. Closer than we anticipated. Human scientific methodology, while crude compared to galactic standards, operates at an accelerated pace that matches their temporal effects. They're conducting experiments and reaching conclusions at remarkable speed. Commander HFY's buzzing took on a concerned tone. If humans become aware of their temporal manipulation abilities, they might attempt to harness or enhance them artificially. The potential for catastrophic paradoxes would increase exponentially. The chamber fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear. Humanity wasn't just a species with unusual engineering challenges. They were potentially the most dangerous temporal anomaly the galaxy had ever encountered. Their rapid development, combined with unconscious time manipulation abilities, created a scenario that could fundamentally alter the nature of galactic civilization. Admiral Zex Thor's form dimmed as he considered their options. We're going to need to involve the Temporal Oversight Committee. This situation has moved beyond engineering concerns into the realm of cosmic stability. Agreed, Director Vashta said. But we need to proceed carefully. Humanity has allies throughout the galaxy now. Any action that appears to target them unfairly could destabilize existing treaties and trade agreements. Dr. Kethala's tentacles moved nervously across her interfaces. There's one more factor we haven't discussed. The temporal distortions around human activities aren't just accelerating time. They're also affecting the fundamental constants that govern matter and energy within those zones. She displayed new readings that showed variations in gravitational constants, electromagnetic fields, and even quantum mechanical properties within areas of high human activity. The structures aren't just aging rapidly, she explained. They're being subjected to physical laws that are subtly different from baseline galactic norms. It's as if human consciousness somehow influences the fundamental nature of reality itself. The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. If humans could unconsciously alter physical constants, the implications went far beyond engineering failures. They were potentially dealing with a species whose very existence challenged the stability of the universe itself. Admiral Zex Thor's crystalline form began to glow with intense internal light, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. Emergency protocols need to be implemented immediately. All ongoing human construction projects must be placed under discrete observation. We need to understand exactly how extensive these reality distortions are. And what if they're getting stronger? Commander THYSS asked, his collective mind processing worst-case scenarios. What if human temporal effects are increasing as their population grows and their technology advances? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. The possibility that humanity's reality-altering effects might be growing stronger over time suggested that the galaxy was facing not just an engineering problem, but an existential threat that could reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. Engineer Sarah Chan stood at the edge of the construction site, watching the robotic assembly units work on the foundation of what would become the largest atmosphere processor in the Kepler system. The massive machines moved with precise efficiency, laying down the molecular bonding structures that would anchor the facility to the planet's bedrock. Everything appeared perfect according to her instruments, yet a nagging feeling in her gut told her something was wrong. Running diagnostics on Section 7, she called out to her team through the communication array. The response came back immediately from Marcus Rodriguez, her structural specialist who was monitoring the project from orbit. All readings nominal. Sarah. Molecular cohesion is holding at 97% efficiency, well above design specifications. The Zephyrian construction protocols are holding steady. Sarah frowned as she studied her handheld scanner. The numbers were indeed perfect, too perfect, in fact. After 15 years of working on alien construction projects, she had developed an instinct for identifying problems before they manifested in the data. The patterns she was seeing reminded her of every major structural failure she had witnessed in her career. Marcus, pull up the historical data from the Proxima Station Bridge project. Compare the early readings with what we're seeing now. There was a pause as Marcus accessed the archive files. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of concern. That's interesting. The molecular signatures are nearly identical, down to the quantum resonance frequencies. That project failed catastrophically after 42 years of operation. And the space elevator on New Terra, also showing similar patterns in the foundational phase. Sarah, what are you thinking? She walked closer to the construction zone, her environmental suit automatically adjusting to maintain optimal temperature and pressure. The alien technology that surrounded her represented the pinnacle of galactic engineering. Materials that could theoretically last millions of years. Energy systems that drew power directly from quantum fluctuations, and construction techniques that had been perfected across millennia. Yet somehow, whenever humans were involved, these marvels of engineering became temporary structures with lifespans measured in decades rather than epochs. I think we're missing something fundamental, she said, kneeling down to examine the molecular bonding matrix more closely. The galactic species have been building structures for thousands of years, but we've only been working with their technology for 50. Maybe there's something about our involvement that they don't understand. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's voice crackled through the communication system from her mobile laboratory several kilometers away. Sarah, you need to see what I'm picking up on the temporal monitoring equipment. There are fluctuations in the local space-time metric that don't match any known phenomena. Temporal monitoring? Sarah asked, surprised. Since when do we monitor temporal fields on construction projects? Since the Galactic Engineering Council started placing discrete observation stations around all our projects 6 months ago. They think we don't know about them, but their quantum signature is pretty distinctive once you know what to look for. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the planet's thin atmosphere. They're monitoring us specifically, not just the projects in general. That's what it looks like. And, Sarah, the readings I'm getting suggest that time is moving faster around our work sites. Not by much, maybe a few parts per billion, but consistently faster wherever humans are present in significant numbers. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had always wondered why human-built or human-supervised structures seemed to age more rapidly than similar projects managed entirely by galactic species. If time was literally moving faster around human activities, it would explain the accelerated aging and deterioration patterns they had observed. Dr. Tanaka, can you get specific measurements? I need to know exactly how the temporal variance correlates with human presence. Already working on it. The effect seems to scale with the number of humans in close proximity and the intensity of their mental focus. During high-stress problem-solving sessions, the temporal acceleration spikes significantly. Marcus's voice cut through their conversation with urgent concern. Sarah, you need to look at Section 12 immediately. We're seeing spontaneous molecular reorganization in the bonding matrix. Sarah activated her suit's mobility system and jetted toward the indicated section, her mind racing with possibilities. If human consciousness somehow affected the flow of time and the fundamental properties of matter, they weren't dealing with simple engineering challenges. They were confronting the possibility that their species possessed unconscious reality manipulation abilities. The sight that greeted her at Section 12 confirmed her worst fears. The molecular bonding matrix, which should have maintained perfect structural integrity for millennia, was showing signs of advanced aging despite having been installed only hours earlier. The crystalline structures were developing stress fractures, and the quantum lock joints were beginning to show signs of decay. This is impossible, Marcus said through the communication link. According to our understanding of galactic engineering principles, these materials don't age. Period. They're locked in a temporal stasis field that prevents any form of entropic decay. Unless something is interfering with the stasis field, Sarah murmured, running her scanner over the affected areas. Dr. Tanaka, I need you to focus your temporal monitoring on this exact location. Tell me what's happening to local space-time. The response came back within minutes. Sarah, you're not going to like this. The temporal stasis field around the bonding matrix is being systematically disrupted. It's as if reality itself is rejecting the notion of permanent structures in areas with high human presence. Sarah stood up slowly, her mind struggling to process the implications. If human consciousness somehow interfered with temporal stasis fields, it would explain every structural failure they had experienced. More importantly, it suggested that their species possessed abilities that could fundamentally challenge the technological foundations of galactic civilization. We need to run a controlled experiment, she announced. Marcus, I want you to set up a test matrix using standard galactic materials. Dr. Tanaka, monitor the temporal fields around the test site. I'm going to systematically vary the number of humans in proximity and measure the effects. Over the next several hours, they conducted a series of increasingly sophisticated experiments. The results were both fascinating and terrifying. The presence of even a single human created measurable distortions in local space-time. Multiple humans working together amplified the effect exponentially. And when humans were engaged in intense problem-solving or creative activities, the temporal distortions became strong enough to disrupt the fundamental forces that held galactic technology together. We're essentially walking temporal anomalies, Dr. Tanaka observed as they reviewed the data. Every human alive is unconsciously manipulating the flow of time and the basic properties of matter. Marcus pulled up historical records from Earth's pre-space flight era. This would explain so much about our history. Why our ancient monuments required constant maintenance. Why our infrastructure always seemed to wear out faster than it should have. We weren't building inferior structures. We were building in temporal acceleration zones. Sarah felt a mixture of awe and terror as she contemplated their discovery. Humanity hadn't just stumbled into galactic civilization. They had arrived, carrying abilities that could reshape reality itself. The question was whether the galactic community would see this as a gift or a threat. We need to contact the Galactic Engineering Council, she said reluctantly. They clearly suspect something, given their monitoring stations. We should be proactive about sharing our findings. Are you sure that's wise? Dr. Tanaka asked. If we're right about what's happening, we're essentially admitting that our species poses a fundamental threat to cosmic stability. The alternative is letting them figure it out on their own, without our input or perspective. Given what we know about galactic politics, that could end badly for humanity. Marcus was already compiling their experimental data into a comprehensive report. I'll encrypt everything and send it through diplomatic channels. But, Sarah, we need to be prepared for the possibility that this discovery could change everything about humanity's place in the galaxy. Before Sarah could respond, an urgent alarm sounded throughout the construction site. The atmospheric processor's primary support structure, a component that had been completed and certified just 3 days earlier, was showing critical stress indicators. Impossible, Marcus muttered as he accessed the structural monitoring systems. The support columns are rated for forces that exceed anything this planet could produce. They should be stable for at least 1,000 years. Sarah activated her jetpack and flew toward the affected structure, her instruments already detecting the familiar patterns of accelerated aging. The support beams, constructed from materials that should have been virtually indestructible, were developing microfractures and showing signs of molecular decay consistent with centuries of wear. "It's happening faster than we thought," she reported grimly. "The temporal acceleration is increasing." "Dr. Tanaka, what are your readings showing?" "Massive temporal distortions centered on the main construction zone." "Sarah, the effect is spreading. The entire atmospheric processor is now sitting in a zone where time is moving approximately 10% faster than baseline galactic normal." The implications were staggering. If the temporal acceleration could increase spontaneously, human presence might create expanding bubbles of altered spacetime that would consume entire planets. The atmospheric processor project wasn't just failing. It was becoming a testing ground for humanity's unconscious reality manipulation abilities. "Emergency shutdown," Sarah ordered. "All human personnel need to evacuate to a minimum safe distance. We need to see if removing human presence can stabilize the temporal distortions." As the human team withdrew from the construction site, they maintained continuous monitoring of the temporal fields and structural integrity measurements. The results were both encouraging and deeply unsettling. The temporal acceleration began to decrease almost immediately after human evacuation, but the damage to the atmospheric processor's structure continued to accumulate. "It's like the materials have been infected with accelerated aging," Dr. Tanaka observed. "Even removing the source of temporal distortion isn't enough to stop the decay process once it's begun." Marcus pulled up comparative data from similar projects throughout the galaxy. This explains why the galactic species avoid working with humans on long-term infrastructure projects. It's not discrimination, it's a practical necessity. Our presence makes their technology fundamentally unreliable. Sarah watched the atmospheric processor slowly collapse under stresses that should have been impossible to generate, her mind already working through the broader implications of their discovery. If human consciousness could unconsciously manipulate time and matter, what would happen as their population expanded throughout the galaxy? What would occur when millions or billions of humans were concentrated on individual worlds? "We're not just another species joining galactic civilization," she realized with growing alarm. "We're a force of nature that could fundamentally alter the structure of reality itself." The thought sent chills down her spine as she contemplated humanity's future among the stars. Their rapid technological development, their ability to solve problems that had stymied galactic civilization for millennia, their remarkable adaptability. All of these traits suddenly made sense as manifestations of unconscious temporal manipulation. "Dr. Tanaka, I need you to run projections on human population growth and the potential scaling of temporal effects. If our abilities are increasing with population density and technological advancement, we need to understand what we're looking at in terms of galactic impact." The response came back an hour later, and it was more disturbing than Sarah had feared. "Based on current growth rates and the scaling patterns we've observed, human colonies could become isolated temporal zones within the next century. We're talking about entire star systems where time moves significantly faster than galactic baseline." which would create pockets of accelerated development that could advance centuries while the rest of the galaxy experiences only decades. Marcus added grimly. We could become a species that exists in fast-forward relative to everyone else. Sarah stared at the ruins of the atmospheric processor, understanding now that they were witnessing more than just another engineering failure. They were seeing the first evidence of humanity's potential to reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. The question was whether the galaxy would allow them to continue existing long enough to find out what that meant. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the ancient chambers of Nexus Prime, where representatives from 847 member species gathered in physical form despite the ability to communicate through quantum entanglement networks. The gravity of the situation demanded personal presence, and the massive amphitheater hummed with tension as beings from across the galaxy struggled to comprehend the implications of humanity's newfound abilities. Chancellor Mordun of the Silicon Collective called the session to order with a resonance that shook the crystalline walls. We are gathered to address the temporal anomaly that has come to be known as the human effect. Recent discoveries have forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about this species and their place in galactic civilization. Admiral Zex Thor materialized at the central podium, his crystalline form displaying the stress fractures that appeared in his species when dealing with extreme uncertainty. Honored delegates, the situation is more severe than our initial reports indicated. Human presence doesn't just accelerate the aging of structures. It fundamentally alters the nature of reality within expanding spheres of influence. The holographic displays that surrounded the amphitheater flickered to life, showing the most recent observations from human colonies throughout the galaxy. The images were disturbing. Entire cities where buildings showed advanced decay, despite being recently constructed, space installations that had crumbled within decades of completion, and, most alarming of all, measurements indicating that time itself moved at different rates in areas of high human concentration. Ambassador Thyravek of the Ethereal Conclave spoke next, her voice carrying across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our preliminary analysis suggests that human consciousness operates on quantum frequencies that interfere with the fundamental constants that govern matter and energy. They are not using technology to create these effects. They're unconsciously rewriting the basic laws of physics through the act of existing. A wave of alarmed vocalizations rippled through the assembled delegates. Species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, manipulated stars, and bent the fabric of space to their will found themselves confronted with a phenomenon that challenged their understanding of reality itself. Dr. Veshtar of the Temporal Studies Institute stepped forward, his ancient form moving with careful precision. The temporal distortions we've measured around human activities are unlike anything in our historical records. Most concerning is that the effects appear to be strengthening over time. Early human colonies showed minimal temporal variance, but recent settlements are experiencing time dilation of up to 15% above galactic baseline. 15%. Chancellor Mordun's harmonic resonance shifted to frequencies associated with disbelief. That level of temporal acceleration would create catastrophic desynchronization with the rest of galactic civilization within centuries. The projections are worse than that, Dr. Veshtar continued grimly. If the scaling continues at its current rate, major human population centers could be experiencing temporal acceleration of 50 to 100% within the next millennium. They would be living in fast-forward relative to the rest of the galaxy. Representative Calathon of the warrior clans stood abruptly, her segmented armor clattering with aggressive harmonics. Then, the solution is obvious. We must act to contain this threat before it destabilizes the entire galaxy. Human colonies must be quarantined or relocated to isolated systems where their temporal effects cannot spread. Quarantine an entire species? Ambassador Thyravek's multidimensional voice carried notes of horror. The Ethereal Conclave cannot support such a course of action. It would violate every principle of galactic law and interspecies cooperation that we have built our civilization upon. Admiral Zexthor's form brightened as he accessed new data streams. The situation is further complicated by humanity's strategic importance to galactic security. Their temporal acceleration abilities have proven invaluable in crisis situations. When the Andromeda Gate network faced cascade failure last year, human engineering teams developed solutions in weeks that would have taken our best scientists decades to formulate. Because they were operating in accelerated time fields, Dr. Veshtar pointed out. They weren't necessarily more intelligent or capable than galactic engineers. They simply had access to more subjective time to work through the problems. The implications of this revelation sparked heated debate throughout the amphitheater. If human rapid problem-solving abilities were the result of unconscious temporal manipulation rather than superior intellect, it cast their remarkable achievements in an entirely different light. Director Quillnex of the Economic Federation interjected with practical concerns. Regardless of the underlying mechanism, human capabilities have become integral to galactic infrastructure. Their trade networks, research partnerships, and technological innovations support trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Complete isolation would trigger an economic collapse that could destabilize entire sectors. Then, we must find alternative solutions, Chancellor Mordun declared. Dr. Veshtar, what options exist for containing or neutralizing the temporal effects? The ancient researchers' form dimmed with uncertainty. Our understanding of the phenomenon is still rudimentary. The temporal distortions appear to be generated by human neural activity, specifically the unique quantum resonance patterns produced by their consciousness. Traditional temporal shielding is ineffective because the effect originates from within the protected area. What about modifying human neural patterns, suggested researcher Prime Vothkar of the Genetic Synthesis Collective. If the temporal effects are generated by specific consciousness configurations, we could develop treatments to suppress or redirect those quantum resonances. The suggestion triggered immediate outcry from multiple delegations. The idea of forcibly altering human consciousness touched on fundamental ethical boundaries that most galactic species considered inviolable. Ambassador Thyravek's voice resonated with moral authority. The ethereal conclave absolutely forbids any intervention that would alter the fundamental nature of human consciousness. Such actions would constitute psychic genocide and violate the most basic principles of sentient rights. Then, what do you propose? Representative Calathon demanded. We allowed humanity to continue expanding throughout the galaxy until their temporal effects create causality paradoxes that unravel the fabric of space-time itself. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's communication systems activated with an urgent priority signal. The massive displays shifted to show an incoming transmission from the human diplomatic corps, originating from Earth's orbital stations. Secretary General Elena Vasquez appeared on the screens, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos that had erupted in the council chambers. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, I believe we need to talk. Chancellor Mordun's harmonic resonance shifted to surprised tones. Secretary General Vasquez, this session was classified under the highest security protocols. How did humanity become aware of our deliberations? Elena smiled grimly. When you start placing temporal monitoring stations around every human colony and construction project, we tend to notice. Our scientists have been conducting their own investigations, and we've reached some rather disturbing conclusions about what's been happening to our structures. Admiral Zexthor's crystalline form flickered with agitation. What have your investigations revealed? That we're not just passive victims of some cosmic quirk, Elena replied. Our research suggests that the temporal effects are manifestations of human evolutionary adaptation to extreme survival pressures. We've survived multiple extinction events, rebuilt civilization from nothing, and learned to accomplish in decades what most species require centuries to achieve because we unconsciously manipulate the flow of time when facing existential challenges. The implications of her statement sent shockwaves through the assembly. If human temporal abilities were evolutionary adaptations rather than random mutations, it suggested that their species had been shaped by forces that required reality manipulation capabilities to survive. Dr. Veshtar leaned forward with intense interest. Are you claiming that human temporal effects are controllable? To some extent, yes, Elena confirmed. We've discovered that the strength and focus of temporal distortions can be influenced by human mental states and collective consciousness. During emergency situations, our temporal effects intensify dramatically. During periods of calm and stability, they diminish to barely measurable levels, which explains why human structures fail more rapidly during peacetime than during crisis periods, Admiral Zexthor realized. When humans are relaxed and not facing immediate challenges, their unconscious temporal acceleration creates chronic stress on permanent infrastructure. Elena nodded grimly. Our psychologists believe that human consciousness evolved to constantly anticipate and prepare for catastrophic change. When we're not actively facing existential threats, our minds create artificial time pressure that manifests as accelerated aging in our environment. Representative Colathon's armor clattering intensified. So, you're telling us that humans are biologically programmed to destabilize their surroundings whenever they're not fighting for survival. That's a rather harsh interpretation, but not entirely inaccurate, Elena admitted. However, our research has also revealed potential solutions. We've successfully created stable temporal zones by training human colonists in meditation and consciousness control techniques. When humans are in states of deep mental equilibrium, their temporal effects can actually strengthen rather than disrupt structural integrity. The revelation sparked immediate interest throughout the council chambers. If human temporal abilities could be directed constructively rather than destructively, the implications for galactic engineering were staggering. Dr. Veshtar accessed his data networks with visible excitement. This could explain the anomalous readings we've detected around certain human meditation centers and spiritual retreats, areas where temporal flow appears to be stabilized rather than accelerated. Exactly, Elena confirmed. We're proposing a collaborative research initiative to develop training protocols that would allow humans to consciously control their temporal effects. Instead of quarantining our species or suppressing our abilities, we could learn to harness them for the benefit of galactic civilization. Chancellor Mordunn's harmonic resonance shifted to contemplative frequencies. What would such collaboration entail? Elena's expression became deadly serious. Full transparency about human temporal abilities and their implications. Joint research programs to develop consciousness training techniques. And, most importantly, a commitment from the galactic community to work with humanity rather than against us as we learn to manage capabilities we never knew we possessed. And if humanity proves unable to control these abilities, Representative Colathon demanded, what safeguards exist to protect the galaxy from temporal contamination? The same safeguards that have always existed, Elena replied firmly. If any species poses a genuine threat to galactic stability, the Council has the authority to impose protective measures. But we're asking for the opportunity to prove that human temporal abilities can be assets rather than liabilities. Ambassador Thyravek's multidimensional voice carried notes of cautious optimism. The Ethereal Conclave supports collaborative research initiatives. If humans can learn to consciously direct their temporal effects, the potential benefits to galactic civilization would be immeasurable. Admiral Zexthor's crystalline form began to glow with new possibilities. Controlled temporal acceleration could revolutionize emergency response protocols, crisis management procedures, and rapid development projects. Instead of seeing human abilities as a threat, we could learn to leverage them as resources. But the risks remain substantial, Dr. Veshtar warned. Temporal manipulation on the scale that humans appear capable of could create causality paradoxes, timeline bifurcations, and reality distortions that might be impossible to contain or reverse. Elena noted acknowledgement, which is why we're proposing careful, controlled research with extensive safety protocols. We're not suggesting that humanity should develop weapons-grade temporal manipulation. We're asking for help learning to live safely with abilities we never chose to have. The debate that followed consumed hours as delegates from across the galaxy wrestled with questions that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness, reality, and the nature of existence itself. The discovery that human temporal abilities were evolutionary adaptations rather than random mutations had shifted the entire framework of the discussion. As the session drew toward a temporary recess, Chancellor Mordun addressed the core issue that would determine humanity's future in galactic civilization. The question before us is not whether humans possess reality-altering abilities that has been established beyond doubt. The question is whether galactic society can safely accommodate a species whose very existence challenges the fundamental constants that govern our universe. Elena Vasquez's final words echoed through the chamber as the transmission ended. Humanity didn't choose to become walking temporal anomalies. But we're here now, and we're part of galactic civilization, whether you like it or not. The choice you face is simple. Work with us to understand and control these abilities, or condemn an entire species for the crime of evolving survival traits in a hostile universe. As the delegates filed out for recess, each species faced the daunting task of determining whether humanity represented the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat that galactic civilization had ever encountered. 6 months after the emergency council session, the experimental research station orbiting Kepler 438b had become the focal point of the most ambitious collaborative project in galactic history. The massive facility, constructed using a revolutionary hybrid of human consciousness techniques and traditional galactic engineering, represented humanity's first attempt to build something that could truly last. Dr. Sarah Chun floated in the station's central observation chamber, watching teams of humans and aliens work together in ways that would have been impossible just a year earlier. The sight still amazed her. Crystalline collective engineers providing structural expertise, while human consciousness specialists maintained temporal stability fields that kept their materials from aging beyond their intended parameters. Temporal variance holding steady at 0.03% above galactic baseline, reported Dr. Yuki Tanaka from her position at the monitoring station. The meditation chamber is working perfectly. The consciousness field generated by the trained human operators is actually strengthening the molecular bonds in the primary support structure. Marcus Rodriguez gestured toward the construction zones visible through the chamber's transparent aluminum walls. It's incredible. We're literally watching humans learn to consciously control abilities they never knew they had. 3 months ago, the meditation teams couldn't maintain stable fields for more than a few minutes. Now, they're sustaining complex temporal matrices for days at a time. The transformation had not been easy. The initial phases of the consciousness training program had been fraught with setbacks as human volunteers struggled to understand and direct mental processes that had operated unconsciously throughout their species' evolution. Several test subjects had suffered severe psychological trauma from attempting to manipulate their own temporal perception fields without proper preparation. But gradually, working with ethereal conclave consciousness specialists and Temporal Studies Institute researchers, humanity had begun to unlock the secrets of their own reality-altering abilities. The breakthrough had come when they stopped trying to suppress their temporal effects and instead learned to focus and direct them with surgical precision. Dr. Chun called out Ambassador Thyravek from her position near the experimental chambers, her multidimensional voice carrying undertones of excitement. The latest test results are remarkable. The human consciousness teams have achieved localized temporal acceleration of 300% without any of the destructive effects we observed in early experiments. Sarah activated her magnetic boots and walked across the chamber's floor to examine the data displays. The numbers were indeed extraordinary. Previous attempts at temporal acceleration had resulted in catastrophic aging of materials and equipment. But the trained human operators had learned to create acceleration fields that enhanced rather than degraded the performance of galactic technology. How are they doing it? She asked, studying the quantum resonance patterns that indicated the active manipulation of space-time. Human consciousness could apparently distinguish between different types of temporal effects and selectively apply them to enhance desired outcomes while protecting vulnerable systems. It was like conducting an orchestra of reality itself. Emergency alert from Sector 7 announced the station's artificial intelligence system. Catastrophic stellar collapse detected in the Ross 128 system. Planetary evacuation required within 48 standard hours. The chamber fell silent as the magnitude of the crisis became clear. Ross 128 was home to over 12 million beings from 6 different species, and the planet's gravity wells made evacuation extraordinarily difficult. Under normal circumstances, saving even a fraction of the population would require months of careful planning and resource allocation. Admiral Zex Thor's image materialized in the chamber through emergency quantum communication protocols. All available ships are being diverted to Ross 128, but our projections indicate we can evacuate less than 2 million beings within the available time frame. We need the human consciousness teams to attempt large-scale temporal acceleration of our evacuation efforts. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that came with pushing the boundaries of human abilities. Admiral, we've never attempted temporal effects on this scale. The largest field we've successfully maintained covered maybe a few cubic kilometers. You're talking about accelerating operations across an entire star system. We understand the risks, the Admiral replied grimly. But without human temporal intervention, 10 million beings will die when Ross 128 goes supernova. We're asking you to attempt something unprecedented because the alternative is unacceptable. Dr. Tanaka was already running calculations on our mobile systems. Sarah, if we could link the consciousness teams from all 3 research stations and coordinate their temporal fields, we might be able to create system-wide acceleration zones. The evacuation ships would experience time acceleration while the planetary populations remained in normal time flow. The psychological strain on the human operators would be enormous, warned Ambassador Thyravek. Maintaining large-scale temporal manipulation requires levels of mental focus that could cause permanent psychological damage. Marcus accessed the station's communication networks to contact consciousness specialists throughout human space. We have over 300 trained temporal operators across 12 stations. If we network their efforts and rotate teams to prevent mental exhaustion, we might be able to sustain the required fields. The next 6 hours became a frantic race against time as human consciousness teams across the galaxy linked their abilities in ways that had never been attempted. Using quantum entanglement networks originally designed for faster-than-light communication, the scattered operators began to weave their individual temporal effects into a coherent system-spanning field. Sarah watched in amazement as the holographic displays showed the formation of interconnected acceleration zones throughout the Ross 128 system. Evacuation ships were experiencing time dilation that allowed them to complete multiple trips in the subjective time normally required for a single journey, while the planetary population remained in normal temporal flow to prevent panic and confusion. It's working, Dr. Veshtar reported with audible astonishment. The Human Consciousness Network is maintaining stable temporal acceleration across 14 cubic light-hours of space. This should not be possible according to any known physics. But the strain on the human operators was becoming increasingly evident. Sarah monitored the psychological profiles of the consciousness teams and saw stress indicators that approached dangerous levels. The mental effort required to maintain system-wide temporal manipulation was pushing human consciousness to its absolute limits. Team Alpha reporting severe mental fatigue. Came a strained voice from the first meditation chamber. We're approaching psychological redline. Need immediate rotation. Team Beta, standing by for primary field control, responded another group of operators from a distant station. The handoff of temporal field control required split-second coordination as one team gradually reduced their influence while another increased theirs, maintaining seamless acceleration effects throughout the transition. For 36 hours, humanity's consciousness specialists performed the impossible. Working in carefully coordinated shifts, they maintained temporal acceleration zones that allowed the evacuation fleets to save over 9 million beings from the doomed Ross 128 system. When the star finally went supernova, less than 300,000 beings remained on the planet, those who had chosen to stay behind for personal or religious reasons. As the emergency ended and the temporal fields were gradually reduced to baseline levels, Sarah found herself surrounded by exhausted but triumphant human operators and alien observers who seemed to be struggling to process what they had witnessed. In 36 hours, humanity just saved 9 million lives using abilities we didn't know we possessed 6 months ago, Marcus said with obvious pride. That has to count for something with the Galactic Council. Admiral Zex Thor's image reappeared in the chamber, his crystalline form glowing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as profound gratitude in his species. Secretary General Vasquez has already received formal thanks from all 6 species that had populations in the Ross 128 system. The Council vote on humanity's status has been moved up to next week. Dr. Veshtar's projection flickered with visible excitement. The implications of what you've accomplished extend far beyond the immediate rescue operation. Humanity has demonstrated that conscious temporal manipulation can be used constructively on scales previously thought impossible. This changes everything about our understanding of consciousness, reality, and the potential for cooperative development. Ambassador Thyravek's multidimensional voice carried notes of deep respect. The ethereal conclave is prepared to support full integration of human consciousness specialists into galactic emergency response protocols. Your abilities represent the most significant advancement in crisis management capabilities in over 10,000 years. But Sarah was more focused on the personal cost of their success. Several human operators had suffered severe psychological trauma from the extended temporal manipulation, and all of them showed signs of permanent changes in their neural patterns. The price of saving 9 million lives had been measured in fundamental alterations to human consciousness itself. We need to understand the long-term effects of large-scale temporal manipulation, she said soberly. The operators who participated in the Ross 128 rescue are showing neural changes that we don't fully comprehend. We may have just demonstrated humanity's greatest capability and greatest vulnerability simultaneously. Dr. Tanaka was already analyzing the neurological data from the exhausted consciousness teams. The changes appear to be beneficial rather than harmful. Extended temporal manipulation seems to have enhanced rather than damaged the operator's cognitive abilities. They're showing increased pattern recognition, improved problem-solving capacity, and what appears to be expanded consciousness awareness. Evolution in real time, Marcus murmured. We're watching humanity adapt to conscious use of abilities that were previously unconscious. The observation carried profound implications. If large-scale temporal manipulation enhanced rather than degraded human consciousness, it suggested that their species was continuing to evolve in response to the challenges of galactic civilization. The traits that had allowed them to survive extinction events on Earth were adapting to help them thrive among the stars. The vote results are coming in, announced Admiral Zex Thor as his image displayed the real-time tallies from the Galactic Council chambers. 847 member species voting on whether to grant humanity full temporal manipulation rights and integrate human consciousness specialists in a galactic infrastructure development. The numbers shifted rapidly across the display as species after species cast their votes. The early results showed strong support from species that had benefited from human temporal abilities during crisis situations, while more conservative delegations expressed continued concern about the long-term implications of conscious reality manipulation. As the final votes were tallied, the result became clear: 623 votes in favor, 187 opposed, with 37 abstentions. Humanity had been granted not just acceptance into galactic civilization, but recognition as a species with unique abilities that could benefit the entire cosmic community. "Congratulations," Admiral Zex Thor said formally. "By decision of the Galactic Council, humanity is hereby recognized as a temporal guardian species, with full rights and responsibilities for consciousness-based reality manipulation and service to galactic civilization." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as the magnitude of the moment sank in. Humanity had gone from being seen as a destructive anomaly to being recognized as guardians of one of the most powerful forces in the universe. Their structures might always age faster than galactic norms, but they had proven that human consciousness could consciously create stability in a universe that was fundamentally chaotic. "What does this mean for us going forward?" Marcus asked. Ambassador Thyravek's response carried the weight of prophecy. "It means that humanity will never build structures the way other species do. Your buildings, your cities, your civilizations will be living things that grow and change and adapt through the conscious will of their inhabitants. You won't create monuments to permanence. You'll create manifestations of the human spirit that evolve as your consciousness expands." Dr. Veshtar added his own perspective. "More importantly, it means that humanity will serve as bridges between the static civilizations of the galaxy and the dynamic nature of reality itself. Your temporal abilities aren't just useful tools. They're proof that consciousness and cosmos can work together to create possibilities that neither could achieve alone." As Sarah looked out at the construction teams continuing their work on the research station, she realized that they weren't just building a facility. They were pioneering a completely new form of architecture that blended consciousness, technology, and reality into something greater than the sum of its parts. The alien structures that lasted millennia were marvels of engineering, but they were ultimately static monuments to unchanging designs. Human structures would always fail according to traditional standards because they were never meant to be permanent. They were meant to be alive, growing, and changing as human consciousness expanded and evolved. "Our structures don't fail," Sarah said with sudden understanding. "They transform. Every collapse, every rebuilding, every adaptation has been our species learning to consciously work with forces that other civilizations try to resist or control." It was, she realized, the most human thing possible to take apparent failure and transform it into unprecedented success through the sheer audacity of consciousness refusing to accept limitations imposed by reality itself. The galaxy had finally learned why human structures always failed, because humanity had unconsciously been building something far more ambitious than mere buildings. They had been constructing the foundation for a new form of civilization where consciousness and cosmos danced together in an eternal act of collaborative creation.